have such sights to show you. We're Poppin the Scary horror podcast here. I'm your host Coale, and with me as always I have my good friend and co-host Aaron. Aaron, hey, how you be?
Hey, you know, I'm pretty good. What's up?
I'm doing mid.
Mid?
Yeah.
You just mid right now?
Yeah, mid is
5 out of 10. Oh, okay.
Gotcha. Yeah, this is another one of the films that I have heard quite a bit about, you know, from the horror community. Definitely one of the, like, big A24 horror films you hear, like, a lot of cinephiles talk about and everything. Just never got around to it. Have you ever heard anything about it at all?
I've seen, like, the trailer. I feel like we even saw the trailer on one of the DVDs
we
were
did.
watching. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've seen the trailer. I've heard some things about it. Yeah, I mean, it looks like a very interesting horror take. It's not your typical I'm in a house and who was phone, you know, kind of horror movie. It's in an interesting locale, it looks like, and with an interesting premise. So I'm excited to see what it's all about.
Yeah. I will mention this. The one thing that I have heard, like, that seems to be a big accomplishment with this film is that it's a horror film in broad daylight.
Yeah, because it's like a never-ending day kind of situation, right?
Maybe. I see, that's the extent of what I know. It's just like in the day. Because I know a lot of horror films tend to rely on suspense in the dark or at night.
Because
like,
what is in where we can't see? We're naturally afraid of the dark.
You know, the freaks come out at night.
Yeah. But this is why I'm gonna think it's. If people think it's scary and spooky and it's in daylight the whole time, then you can't really rely on a lot of cheap gimmicks of like, oh, she's in the woods and it's dark, so you're scared. You know, it's like you gotta get creative with it.
Yeah, I'm definitely curious to see how petrified I'll be without them having the reliance of darkness.
Yeah,
because I know that's definitely like a big factor in horror films. So yeah, I don't really have anything else to say, but yeah, that's one thing I know. The one thing I'm bringing to the table, just placing it right there. So aside from that, not very long intro, but we'll be right back very shortly whenever we watch Midsommar. And we are back from watching Midsommar. Holy cow.
Yeah. Holy cow. That was a 2.5 hour long experience.
Yes. Yeah. I know it's like one of those things that I'm like, I feel like in many ways is similar to Rosemary's Baby, but in other ways not at the same time.
It's in that same vein of horror where the horror doesn't come from, you know, some guy with a knife trying to kill you or, you know, some of those sort of traditional elements. It's more like just very unsettling, deeply disturbing 2.5 hours.
yeah, for sure. It's funny though, because whenever it comes to the pacing, it's pretty slow, and even whenever it's in danger, there's nothing innately disturbing. It's only disturbing because we know something bad's gonna happen,
right?
Since we're already prepared for it to be a horror film. But yeah, definitely. It's so weird because by the point you get towards the end, it's pretty, you realize how deep in the weeds you are.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, it's a slow burn in that respect. I hate to use the word slow burn all the time to describe these kinds of movies, but it really is one of those situations where it's such a slow burn that not even, like, the characters in the movie are necessarily like, we're in danger all the time or anything. It's just like, just a fizzle for the entire 2.5 hours.
Yeah, for sure. But with all that said, how do you feel? I know you usually give, like, opening thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned Rosemary's Baby pretty quick. It's like that in The Exorcist. I feel very similarly between all three of those films of, yeah, coming out of it right out of the gates, it's just kind of still recovering from some of the shocking, horrific things
Yeah.
this movie exposes you to. It really does not pull punches. I mean, right out the gates, I feel like it's safe to say this is not like a casual film to watch on movie night unless your friends are real cool with fucked up shit. It's pretty graphic. One of the most graphic movies we've seen so far.
Yeah, definitely. I think like the reason why it also becomes so graphic is because whenever they decide to use it, they definitely put it in a crazy situation that you would only imagine you would see in a slasher or something like that, or the Saw franchise. Yeah, needless to say, pretty messed up. Yeah, opening thoughts there. It's like just the fact I'm able to compare it to other slow burn films we have seen here on this podcast. I definitely have some things I have really appreciated with this film in comparison to the rest of the slow burn horror genre, and then other stuff that I'm just like, I don't know how to feel about that one there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a pretty unique film. It's definitely pretty modern. I mean, when we're trying to compare it to something like Rosemary's Baby or The Exorcist or whatever, it's like those are older films, and so I feel like some of the slower pacing and stuff is, maybe more expected for films that are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 decades old now. But yeah, whenever it's in a modern film and it's real deliberate and they're doing the crazy camera stuff and the woo, and there's a lot of like drug use in this too, and they're playing around with that with the visual effects and stuff. It's a very different experimental artsy kind of slow burn. Yeah.
I think you actually raise a pretty good point just talking about like the decade difference, because this film came out, I believe, in 2019 is whenever it came out. Yeah, 2019. Yeah. And so it's like, I think I even mentioned this before, like a 50-year difference between Rosemary's Baby and this film there. And it's just, I don't know. I think you definitely raise a good point there that, sometimes the slow burn is used like efficiently, especially like in older films and everything else. And then with newer films, it works to an extent, but the time that they use to stretch out is definitely a little bit more kind of for show, kind of like you mentioned with the drug use.
I would also point out, I feel like the slow burns that we've watched so far that are older, what's making it slow is a lot of exposition and like details. So there's like characters having dialogue and they're talking about the situation, and they're kind of putting in scenes that are only giving you a little detail here and there, not necessarily all action packed, but they're like talking the entire time. And I feel like with this movie, most of the in-between scenes were just like weird things that they're showing you. It's a lot of show, don't tell. And it's a lot of, but I mean, the stuff that they're showing you is just like, this is kind of weird for 2.5 hours. So I feel like, that's part of what makes it different, is they're not like talking, like in Rosemary's Baby, it was like, oh, the neighbor said this. Oh, I was reading this book about this. Oh, well, okay. And this one is just like, meow, violin music in the background for, a 5-minute scene of a weird dinner. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that's definitely a fair point. I think one thing I could compare it to is, have you ever seen Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas?
I haven't.
Okay. Well, it's one of those weird films that I need to sit down and rewatch. I have rewatched it multiple times, and it is the only film I can't definitively rate. It's one of those things that it's weird, but I feel like the whole point of Fear and Loathing is it's very fueled by drugs, alcohol, and everything else. Whereas I feel like in this film, the drugs are just kind of like, it is essential in some ways, and in other ways I felt like, it kind of missed the point, I guess. And so whenever it comes to trippy scenes and stuff like that, I think there's a place in film for stuff like that. But then sometimes I feel like if it was like maybe one scene, it would be a lot more effective. Like, I think there's definitely been drug usage in this film that has, it's used very well, and then other times where it feels unnecessary.
I can see that. I think it's a valid criticism.
Yeah, and it's not a major thing to like strike down or anything, but Something I've gone on about. Well, and holy cow, it's probably been a little while before we've even talked about the whole plot of Midsommar. I just realized we were
True.
just already rambling on our thoughts. I think Aaron and I are also still just gathering up our thoughts about it. But basically, the plot of Midsommar focuses on Danny, played by Florence Pugh, who is dealing with a very traumatic experience going on. And so her boyfriend, Christian, and all his friends, they find out that they're going on this big trip to Sweden.
Sweden.
Yes, Sweden. And so she decides that she wants to go along with them as well.
Yeah, Christian kind
it's
of
definitely
like...
kind of a complicated...
Yeah, Christian's like, man, she's going through a hard time, and we're going to Sweden, and he didn't really tell her that they're going to Sweden. So he's like, oh, you can come too. She's not going to come, though, guys. She's not going to go. But you can come too. And then, of course, she comes, and it's like an awkward dynamic of like, this will help you get past your trauma, and then... As you might guess from a horror movie, it doesn't necessarily help her get past her trauma.
No,
does it?
No, most certainly not. And yeah, and whenever they go, they're basically going to experience this Midsummer festival that they have. And so pretty much they have zero idea about.
Right. Well, like one of the friends in the group, they're like all in college or whatever, just studying anthropology. And he's like, yeah, he's like an exchange student or whatever. He's like, you guys can come back for this festival. It's really cool. We do it every 18 years or whatever. And yeah, nobody seems to know a whole lot about it, except for the dude that's inviting them all there. So
yes. And so it's pretty much like... It takes a while to get to the festival, and then once you arrive at the festival there, that's where, again, the real slow burn starts. But
it's like a 9-day festival, and they go through all 9 days.
Yes, yeah, and you feel all 9 days, basically. And I feel like whenever it comes to this sort of film, I feel like it's pretty straightforward there. Plot-wise, don't really have any issues. It's more kind of like decision making and everything else. I feel like the story is a story that I feel like I've seen plenty of times before, where basically, you know, again, especially being a Friday the 13th nerd, you know, people packing up, going out on a trip to an area they're not too familiar with, out in nature, and then they just kind of have to deal in a situation that they're trapped in.
Yeah, I feel like this one's interesting because they have like... It reminds me of being on like a roller coaster ride where it's like one of those spooky ones at Disneyland or something. Maybe like the Buzz Lightyear one where you gotta shoot. I don't know. In the sense that this movie's on rails, all the characters that are like the foreign people that are in this Midsommar Scary are on a schedule. They're on a 9-day festival, and things got to progress a certain way, and they don't have any control over it, and they can't leave. They're locked in this little car, you know what I mean, on the rails.
Yeah.
But at the same time, even though their path is predetermined, they have no idea what's coming next. So it feels like a haunted house sort of situation for them where it's like, okay, we got to just go through this process, but also I really don't want to be here after I'm like halfway through. I'm like, fuck, and I can't get out.
Yeah, definitely the Omni-Mover system that they are on is definitely very accurate because it doesn't feel like too many like of the consequences that shows up is because of poor decisions per se. I mean, there's definitely some points where you could point out to if you're looking for chinks in the armor, but they're just kind of locked in,
right?
And they can't get out.
Yeah.
But I feel like it definitely makes sense. Horror film, and I definitely think it's good story wise to have the main lead go through this traumatic experience beforehand, so she's definitely still mentally not in a good place because it's not even that far off from whenever they decide to go off on the trip. Like, I think it happened during the winter or something, right? Something like that. And it was only like a few months or something like that.
It happened in the dead of winter, and then they kind of did a time skip. And he was like, oh, I didn't tell you about Sweden? I thought I told you about Sweden.
Yeah.
And she's still dealing with it. Because the trauma she deals with in the very first part of the movie is, we'll just say, they show it and it's incredible.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you're not going to be over it in 6 months. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. It sort of kind of reminds me of The Descent in a way, because the main character goes through a traumatic event. They're taking like a girls trip just to go out and deal with it there. But yeah, it's definitely interesting how many parallels I'm able to draw towards a lot of films when comparing it to the horror genre here. So we'll be able to dive into the nitty gritty for details later. So how about we talk about our main gal, Danny, played by Florence Pugh.
Yeah.
She is very good.
She does a great job.
Yeah, she's very good at especially making me believe that she is going through one of the most traumatic experience anybody can.
Yeah, she's going through an incredibly traumatic experience, and she's also dating like the least understanding person on the planet, who's like kind of trying, but also not really trying.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's like in some ways you can understand where her boyfriend Christian, played by Jack Rayner, is coming from, but at other points you're just like, dude, you're just being a total douchebag right now.
Like a pretty self-centered guy who's checked out of the relationship, but is kind of forced to check back in and be a normal human being when his girlfriend is going through such incredible trauma. He's like, well, I gotta be there for her, but yeah, at the same time, he's just kind of makes some of the worst decisions, and I feel like this isn't a major plot point, so I don't feel bad saying it, but like he like forgets her birthday at one point, and like just typical, like, what are you doing, boyfriend things, and she is like, really good, plays this character of like, I'm trying not to like lean on him too much, but also my life is in fucking shambles right now.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a good dynamic, and I don't know, it's, even though he's like just so awful at being a boyfriend there, he at least is written in a way to where it's like not comedic, to where like how blatantly awful he is.
He's like a realistically bad boyfriend, you know what I mean? He's not like beating her. He's not like just hanging up the phone like, oh god, this thing again, your trauma, bye, you know, like, he's not like a total dick. He's just a dick in the fact that he's like not really present, you know. It's one of those subtle things. It's a very realistic relationship dynamic. Like, I wouldn't be like, if I heard this story in real life about two people I know, I wouldn't be like, wow, we need to hang him in the public square, you know?
Yeah.
Just go ahead and execute this guy. I'd be like, wow, that's kind of a dick move, dude. And, you know, anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely a good, smart move there, because, you know, trying to keep the story grounded is super important. The only character that I would say is, like, very much out there with just his blatant comments is Mark, played by Will Poulter.
Mark.
Oh my gosh, yeah, he's like the comedic relief, and I feel like that's one of my favorite things about this film is at the beginning, it's surprisingly very funny.
It is, yeah.
It has a lot of good, like, humorous moments, which is surprising.
And even sprinkled throughout, just Mark himself is always one of those people that's also not aware of his surroundings and is kind of himself all the time, and is a little disruptive no matter where he is. Kind of a guy. You know, he's not trying to be like a weirdo, but he's just like, what? He's like, I don't feel bad spoiling this little detail here, but because it's toward the beginning. But like when they first get to the festival, he's just like vaping the whole time.
Dude, yes.
It's so funny. They don't like bring attention to it or anything, but you can just see him like they're all doing this Swedish Midsommar festival stuff, and he's just like looking around, just like hitting fat vapes in the background. It's pretty funny without being like, hey, look at this comedy, haha, guys.
Yeah, because it's one of those things, like, he is also pretty much a dick as well, just in his own way. Like, he's the more kind of like out there stuff. He's like the person that you expect in a slasher movie to die immediately.
Yeah.
There with just his attitude there, because just all the actions he does, which I won't spoil everything there, but the vape pen was definitely the one I wanted to hit off. And then it's like whenever you know, right whenever they're having that time around winter before the jump forward, there he's just like, dude, you could be getting her pregnant, but you're stuck with her.
Yeah.
Dragging out this relationship, bruh.
Yeah.
Like doing that, I'm like, oh my god.
He is funny.
Yeah.
He makes a comment, too, that I'm stealing about. He sees a woman he finds attractive, and he's like, God, I want to take a bath with her.
Oh my god. Oh my god, yeah, it's so good, and it's so funny because like I'm like, I don't know really with the script, like who's writing the jokes and everything there. I assume it's probably the director, Ari Aster. Yes, he was director and writer. He is a funny dude, but I feel like, again, maybe we've seen this with Jordan Peele. I feel like the funniest people end up writing the most messed up horror.
That's true. Yeah.
I definitely feel like that, but he's good. And their friend Pele, who's the one that brought them out, played by Wilhelm Blomgren, he's good for the story and everything, and I felt like he was casted appropriately and really does a good job, because he's really, out of all the friend group, the only one willing to kind of connect a little bit with Danny, because he's like, you know, hey, you know, I went through some kind of traumatic experience myself whenever I was little, you know, talking about that. And so just the way he's able just to immediately start connecting with Danny is kind of nice from the get-go, because initially, like, whenever they do decide, like, she's coming on the trip there, Chris is trying to just, like, debrief them all seconds before she arrives.
Right.
Just saying, like, hey, just to let you know, like you mentioned earlier, Erin is just like, I invited her, but she's totally not going. She said no. Well, no, she didn't say no.
She said yeah.
Yeah.
But she's not coming, guys.
Yeah.
He's just the worst.
God. Yeah, but Pele, I feel like, is overall good character to have. Josh, played by William Jackson Harper, is also a very good character.
I like Josh,
He is the astute one. He's the grounded one. He's the one.
And he's also the one that's like kind of the reason they're taking this trip, because he's an anthropology major as well or whatever. And Pele, he's doing like his master's thesis on Midsommar rituals in general, and so like Pele's invited him to his, and so like they're kind of the reason they're going, because he's going with Pele and then the others are just tagging along.
Yeah, and I feel like he's definitely good. He's like kind of the glue to keep it together, because he doesn't get like super emotional unless it's like a certain point of contention that he's really aggravated with or something like that. He's usually just like the one going through, be like, oh, look at these runes here, you know, how ancient are we talking on these runes going on?
Just the Jurassic period.
Yes. But overall, he really does a good job, and I really like how the film like focuses on each individual character, so you get an entire feel on kind of who their character is. And it's hard to quantify the rest of the characters, because there's a lot of characters you meet.
That's true.
But it's like so brief.
Yeah, I
feel
like they're all just kind of part of the commune, is every other character.
Yeah, and why don't we talk about the community and how they all were?
Yeah. So whenever you get to the community, they're all wearing white and flower crowns throughout like the entire thing, and they're all very Swedish. And there's kids, there's adults, it's a community. But they all have their own separate little roles. And at first, it's like, okay, this is cool, and they're doing their little festival thing. And I feel like the more you get to know what's going on and the people, the more it's like, this is kind of culty, shamanistic, kind of weird, like. The little runes they're carving are more than just little fun things. They're actually trying to cast spells and shit. This is a little weird, but okay. And so there's just a variety of people with different roles, and some of the roles are more impactful than others, and some of the roles are more dramatic than others. And but it's neat. It's like, oh wow, I'm watching this rural communities little flower festival, and then it just starts to spiral slowly into craziness. But
I really love the way that Pele described it. He's like, it's like some big dramatic play.
He's like, you will probably think it's kind of silly. We do the dances and we pick a flower queen, and, So that's what they think they're getting into. And, you know, some aspects turn out to be a little more sinister than others. But.
Yeah. I think that's definitely accurate. And like I mentioned, probably later on we'll talk about other characters there, because again, it's like literally like super brief, whether it's like Pele's brothers and the friends that he invited along there that were from like London or something like that.
Yeah. There's like 2 Londoners that are also outsiders that add to the cast of outside people there.
Yeah, and I feel like, you know, you don't get to know them hardly at all. It's just kind of like, again, like Ulf, his brother, is just a brother sort of thing. And I think it's like, again, you have to kind of make your selection on who to develop there. And I think they did the best selections they could for what the story they wanted to tell.
Yeah.
So this film is kind of hard to dissect again, but whenever it came to the horror, without spoiling anything, how horrific was it for you?
Well, that's a good question, because it really depends on what you might have in your brain when you think horror. As far as, like, you know, traditional, maybe like slasher type horror where it's like a jump scare and you know, that sort of aspect, like 0 out of 10. There's like almost none of that for me, of just like, ooh, there's a little bit, I guess, and I shouldn't say 0, because there's definitely a few scenes where you're like, ooh, something's coming, something's gonna pop out. There's like a couple of those, but the vast majority of where the horror, in quotes, I guess, I would put this, is just, the horrific imagery, scenes, rituals that you are subjected to as a viewer, and that you witness these people have to witness or be a part of. It's like, so I think just that unease, that and combined with just like witnessing some fucked up shit, that aspect of horror is like a 10 out of 10. It's they go all out in that kind of territory, and they do it very well. I was uneasy throughout the vast majority of this movie, and disturbed in many parts too.
Yeah. It's definitely. I joked with Aaron, and I'm just like, I have a feeling this is probably going to be messed up, and it definitely is pretty messed up, even kind of from the beginning, because the traumatic event, it's not just a simple, oh, this happened to it. No, you get the full extent of what happened.
There is not a goddamn thing in this movie that they don't show all of. They don't like, oh, and then the camera cuts away. It's like, no, you're gonna watch this.
Yeah, and so it's like moments like that that's just sprinkled through, because it'll be like a lot of nothing, and then all of a sudden there's just an instance of, this is horribly messed up right here, and then it'll pull back, and then later on, you know,
right in your face again.
Which is kind of like weird, because usually with a slow burn, it's just usually kind of like hints of like messed up stuff. Kind of like, again, when you talked about Rosemary's Baby, it kind of felt like a spiral. This one kind of felt like an elevator that just would drop suddenly, like those drop elevators, you know, and you're like, huh, now you're here, but you're gonna keep cruising. Bow, you're here. Bow, bow. And then at some point you don't even know what level you're on right now.
Yeah.
So it's definitely not a feel good film whatsoever there, but like, as opposed to like I don't know, it's like Rosemary's Baby. Like, I'm sorry to keep comparing it to that, but that was like the last film we watched, so comparing it back to back, like similar. That one, like, I still felt like I felt uneasy. I wouldn't say that I felt like super perturbed unless certain moments happened. Like, there were some moments that happened where I was like, ugh. Midsommar, I feel perturbed and then disturbed and then disgusted at some points. And so I feel like it's definitely a lot more heavy with what it decides to reveal. And not to mention, their use of drugs throughout the film definitely just causes it to be a much more disorienting experience there.
Yeah. I feel like it was interesting and appropriate at times, but also, you could, sometimes they would take some drug, and then like 20 minutes later they're still doing drug camera effects, and I'm like, that's just the nature of this film, I guess.
Yes, I think that's accurate. I did want to ask, the fact that this film was, it is indeed, for the most part, taking place during the day. How was it seeing that day-like horror?
I thought it was, yeah, I thought it was interesting, and I thought it added a lot to how this film was trying to scare its audience, because it wants you to see everything. You know what I mean? They're not trying to hide, there's a shadowy figure in the corner kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, look at this shit that they're openly doing and celebrating. And the horror comes from the fact that, like, there's like 4 to 6 people that are on the outside that are surrounded by this community of like 100 people that are doing fucked up shit, and like they're the outsiders, and
Mm-hmm.
your opinion of like what is fucked up is suddenly outvoted, and you don't
Mm-hmm.
have a way to escape. And so like the tension comes from the fact that the people are there and you're seeing it, but you're still alone. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You're still isolated, and not necessarily from like there's one spooky figure in the dark. You know. So I mean, I feel like the daylight actually sort of aids that horror, and even some of the
Mm-hmm.
more disturbing scenes I can think of are just infinitely more disturbing in the daytime than they would be at night, I think.
Yeah, I definitely would agree, because again, they are not hiding anything. You see everything whether you want to or not.
Mm-hmm.
I will mention another thing that adds to the disturbingness of the film is the music. The music is right on the precipice, kind of similar to The Shining, where sometimes it's music, melodic, other times it's just straight up noise.
There's a lot of noise, yeah.
Yes, and it's definitely like that. And it's just like you get the chants and the humming and the droning and everything there. So it's like very, very also archaic with how it sounds
Yeah.
there, because like as something with The Shining, which kind of feels just more otherworldly with its soundtrack there, this one is just very just archaic and definitely feels ancient.
Yeah.
So it's definitely adds to the disturbing feel of the film. And even though everything's bright and colorful, they will also gladly show lots of disturbing paintings as well. You know, it's like Aaron joked at the beginning of the film, it's just like some of the faces they make. It's like so, I don't know, it's such a certain style.
Yeah, it's like that kind of like, you know, medieval, Middle Ages sort of style of painting and murals that's kind of everywhere. Obviously very Nordic as well, because they're in Sweden. And so it's just like that sort of folklore, fairy tale stuff, but not, you know, in some aspects it's like, oh, this is the cutesy sort of thing. You know, they have the maypole and they're going to do a little flower dance or whatever. But then all of the other stuff that we haven't preserved over time is also still present with just fucked up, shamanistic, weird shit. So
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think we're getting to the point where, again, we can't talk too much without spoiling. Anything else you want to add before jumping towards that spoiler territory?
no, I don't think so. Yeah, I think we covered the major aspects.
Okay, no worries. So, without further ado, I guess I should say...
No ados.
Yeah, no, don't do...
Don't ado me.
Don't do... Yeah, no, unless it's faded, of course. Aside from that, what do you rate Midsommar, Aaron?
I will give Midsommar a 7 out of 10. A 7 out of 10 movie for me. I think what it does very well. In fact, if I was rating this on a scale of like what's some of the most just disturbing movies tier list, yeah, it would be a 10 out of 10. Holy shit, it's disturbing. And it's very well done, it's very well put together, it's very well edited, it's very well acted, the soundtrack's great. So why, oh why, did you deduct 3 points from it, Aaron, you might be asking. It is a 2.5 hour long, very long movie. Much of the horror aspect, a lot of it was like necessary, but so much of it was also just kind of gore porn, you know, excessive for the point of being excessive. I feel like this film probably leans on that a little too heavily. That's where like all of the horror came from, and also pretty much all of the plot is just focusing on this albeit very interesting, but disturbing rituals and stuff that they do. I feel like the film is as I've used this term a few times, is definitely embraces a body genre of film, which is intending the audience to physically react to something, like physically be disgusted. And I think it leans probably a little too heavily on that to be rated higher in my book, but it is, from the standpoint of art is made to make you feel something. It definitely makes you feel something, and it's definitely artistic in that aspect. It'll be one that I remember for a long time, and so it gets a lot of credit for that. And yeah, it is very well put together, but I think the plot itself is a little simplistic, honestly, whenever you uncover the layers of disturbing horror. Yeah, and I do think it's a little masturbatory in some aspects.
That's actually a pretty freaking good word for this film.
It's just like, look at this.
Yeah. Honestly, I'm not too far off. We're pretty much neck and neck with how I feel. I struggle between giving this anything higher than a 7. I feel like 7 is kind of right where I'm at there. You know, I could say maybe 6.5, but I do have to give it like lots of clout and credit for a lot of new territories it did explore. And so it's like, I don't know. It's always hard to know whether the critical or just fun side kind of wins in my reviews there. So I feel like I'm just right there with you at a 7. I feel like there's a lot of scenes that I'm like, man, this is so well done. Like, one of my favorites is the pole dancing scene. Not that kind of pole dancing scene, mind you.
Maypole,
Yes,
guys.
the maypole. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying for me. That's one of my favorite scenes. But then there's a lot of scenes that's like, okay, I get it. I get the point of this scene. Move on and everything, and it just is so drawn out. It does a lot of clever things, but it's also drawn out. It's like if I had an option of like watching any 2.5 hour movie, this is probably not one I pop in, not only because of the disturbing factor, but again, just kind of pacing wise and everything. I'm just like, okay, I get the point of this scene already. We can move along. Whereas I felt like Rosemary's Baby, every scene felt deliberate and
it
needed
something.
Like it needed to connect. It's a long film for sure, but I can't really think of anything else you could do to take away the impact the ending has. This one, I felt like if you had cut up a lot of the film, different pieces and everything, I still would have had the same effect. I definitely think there's room for editing there. Not to say it should be edited, but like if I was looking at this film, I definitely would have cut it down closer to maybe, like I could probably easily cut 15 minutes out, just shaving pieces off. And aside from like Florence Pugh, who has the deepest character, because again, she is the centralized character. The other characters, while good, don't really reel me in at all, and so because of that, I definitely put it down at 7. The 7 is like comes out of mostly out of respect, if I'm being honest, because whenever it comes to like, oh man, I'm just enjoying it, wee. No, it's definitely not a wee film. Definitely not, especially with a lot of the disturbingness, even from the beginning. It just bums me the hell out there. So it definitely comes from a more critical standpoint, but yeah, let that be the determination on whether this film is for you or not. I will say this, you know, I feel like A24 has developed a reputation when it comes to its horror films, and obviously we've seen a few here, like The Lighthouse, The Vitch. It's definitely along those lines of horror there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very artistic and stark, and in a very interesting environment that has all those sorts of elements at play. Very creative, and I give it a lot of points for all those things. But yeah.
I'm glad we're kind of on the same page there. So this is your part where if you want to watch it, figure out what Midsommar's all about, head on out. Otherwise, stick around, and we're going to talk about spoilers here. Spoilers. Aaron, how about you talk about the first thing you want to talk about?
Shoot, I feel like it always kind of makes sense to go a little bit chronologically with the spoilerinos.
Yes.
So I guess we could talk about the initial trauma.
Yeah, that was horribly messed up, dude.
Super fucked up. And it also just pretty solidly establishes Danny and Christopher and their flawed relationship going into the rest of the movie.
Yeah, because like the whole thing starts with Danny's sister being like, I can't take this, I'm going to take my own life. And then Christian goes through the same motions like, you have to cry for help,
Like,
you know.
Dude, she's she does this every week. Like,
well, and it's so bad because it's believably awful.
Yeah.
Because again, you've seen like a lot of stuff of like people who are very suicidal. They go through motions of, oh, I'm gonna do it there, and then it just gets to a point because like they've had to keep being pulled back, to not being driven to suicide. That people are just like, oh, we've gone through the motions, nothing's going to happen. And, Danny's concerned because it's still her sister there. But here's the messed up thing I wasn't even expecting, and I don't think they ever gave reason as to why. Not only does Danny's sister commit suicide, she also causes her parents to be killed as well. Yeah. Because they took, like, the exhaust from the car, and she funneled it to underneath her parents' like door frame, taped it in so that way they would also suffocate, while she had like a basically this duct tape mask over so she would directly inhale it.
Yeah.
And so I don't know why she killed her parents as well, if it was ever explained or anything.
She was just mentally messed up, man. Murder suey.
Yeah, it was really awful there. And again, they show you everything.
Yeah, the very first scene is her calling her parents, and her parents aren't answering, and it shows them asleep in their bed, and you can hear it like on the answering machine. It's only later you kind of put together, oh, they weren't waking up to the phone call because they were dead.
Yeah, that makes it even more disturbing there, because you think like, oh yeah, they're just dead asleep. Uh-oh.
And they show everything. The girl with her like tube down her throat, duct taped on. It was also like, was that like blood?
I think it was like puke maybe or something
there's
that.
There's like a black or like dark substance all down the front of her shirt. It's just like, and one of her eyes was like popping out.
Oh yeah, it was
just fucked up.
Yeah, it was real life horror, real life horror right there.
They do a very clever thing with the editing where they have like the emergency lights on. So like you start and you just see the garage and you see the blue and red lights, so you know something's bad, and then you see the tubes connected to the top, and then they follow the tubes all the way up the stairs. And they use the same motif was whenever Florence Pugh's character Danny is having her little trauma flashbacks later, like things in her real life will start to flash like red and blue, like the emergency sirens or whatever. So you can like that imagery comes back to her. So I think they do a fantastic job of not only showing that initial trauma, but then showing what somebody going through PTSD.
Yeah, I gotta be honest. That also might be another favorite part of my film, is just that opening sequence, as deeply disturbing as it is. And I wasn't like, yeah, dead family. Woo! It just was shot really nicely. Like, just the cinematography was good there, and again, showing right from the get-go where Danny and Christian's relationship is at that point in time is just done super well and believable. Because, like, again, he's like, Danny's calling, and so he picks up the phone there, and it's just, like, pure screaming, just, like, traumatized screaming there, because, she's just gotten the news about what's happened, and then, it shows, again, the whole scene play out on like what happened to her family, and then it shows like Christian walking through the snow, and that snow was like beautifully shooken out, by the way. That was like perfect snow falling down, and then it just focuses on Danny just kind of hunched over, kind of like in a fetal position, just bawling her eyes out appropriately, as all he could do is just kind of stand there, and he does it believably to where he's not doing enough to support her, but at the same point, he's like, okay, I need to try to support her.
Yeah, he's like, he doesn't really know what to do besides let her lay down and him, like, pat her head. You know what I mean? He's like, I'm here for you, but he's, like, not quite there enough. And
I feel like he did such a good job. That was so well directed there, and so that's, like, just was really well written there. And so I think that's what makes later parts of the film that aren't quite as concise and to the point like that as good.
And I love they do this with Christian's character a lot, where you can tell he's just like a sociopath or something. He doesn't really have empathy, because he'll be in certain situations where he'll be like, he'll ask a question or something and realize it's fucked up and just be like, sorry, or whatever.
Yeah.
He does this later with whenever he's like, yeah, well, I think I'm going to do my thesis here. And the guy, Coale or whatever, Josh's name, was like, you're joking.
Yeah, like I've been
I've been working on, I've been studying this all my life. He's, no, I mean, well, he even starts out, he's like, I came here to ask you. Well, I wanted to tell you that. God. I was like, oh my God, Christian. I'd kick his ass right there. Fuck that guy.
See, and I didn't know, because, like, again, it's so funny, because comparing it to, like, Rosemary's Baby, you have Rosemary's husband also kind of seeming detached there. Yeah,
but he's a better actor.
Yes, and he has a better reason.
Yeah. He's like, oh, and he does a good job of smoothing things over. But this guy's like his character, not the actor that plays him, but his character is a bad actor as like covering up when he's being a dick. And so he's just like, yeah. There's one point where he's asking the elders, he's like, you guys have a problem with incest?
Oh, God.
He's like, no disrespect or anything, just, small community. He just doesn't realize what he's about to say is stupid. But he does that with Danny a lot, too.
Well, yeah, because especially, like, whenever it came to how long they were dating and stuff, it's like, how long have you guys been dating? It's like, about half years. She's like, 4 years. He's like, no. And like,
she goes, 4 years and 2 weeks, which is really telling too, because it means their anniversary just passed and he didn't remember.
Oh my gosh! Oh, that's such a good thing to pick up.
And it's great because Danny's also not the type of person that's like gonna make a deal out of that. Like he also forgot her birthday was that day, and she's like, didn't. The only time she mentions it is because what's his name remembers the other guy in the group that invited them all along.
Oh yeah, Pele remembers it's her birthday. Yeah,
and he gives her and he's like, oh, you don't have to tell anyone or whatever. He's like, she was like, Christopher didn't even remember, so it's okay. And then she's like, no, I don't want to make this a thing. I didn't mean to say that.
Yeah, I feel like one other thing I do want to make apparent is like they as they do a good job with making sure that Christian is believably awful with stuff, they do a good job showing that Danny is not okay throughout this entire thing. Because, a lot of times if people go through a traumatic experience, they're like, they want to go back to that normalcy and how everything was. And so they just have surface level like, yeah, I'm fine. But she is never completely fine whatsoever. It's only till like surprisingly later in the film, whenever you start to see her like smile more and have comfort, which then ends up being a lot more disturbing kind of once you realize where the film's going. And like, because one of my favorite scenes is like, freaking Pele is just trying, hey, look, I'm really sorry that, your family was killed. My parents were killed in a fire. It's not the same, but it's similar. And he's trying to be nice and apologize, and then she just has to get up and go to the bathroom because again she's having just like a mental breakdown, and then it cuts to the plane showing that this is like the second time at least that she's having another breakdown. And so because of her having those multiple breakdowns, I think that's important, because as opposed to like The Descent, where you have that initial trauma and then that like little like, oh yeah, I'm okay, and then acts normal completely, and then at the end you're like, oh right, she's traumatized.
Right, it doesn't really have that be part of the character, honestly.
Yeah, so I feel like Florence Pugh, good God, whenever she has to scream, you believe her screams of pain and everything, just how upset she is. So I feel like they do...
And they do a good job of keeping like the trigger consistent too, because anytime family's mentioned, she's just like, and she walks off, and in certain scenes you can hear her mutter like, "Don't think about that, don't think about that," because she's trying to just stay in the present moment and not like relapse back to that point of trauma.
Yeah, and so I think that's why like the use of drugs is so interesting, because like whenever they first initially get there, they're like, hey, want to do shrooms? And then she's like, oh, I don't think that's a good idea. And then the dude just starts to get upset. Mark is just like, really?
Yeah,
really,
fucking Mark.
Yeah, he's just upset that he's not doing shrooms.
And it's one of those things. It's one of those like weird social things where they're all like, they all didn't really want Danny to come anyway, because they're like, she's gonna ruin our cool bros trip.
Yeah.
And with all her fucking girly trauma shit, and then she comes in and they're like mushrooms, and she's like, I'll just take mine later. And then Christopher is trying to be a nice guy, and it's just like, I'll wait for you then. And she's like, no, you can do it now. And she's like, no, but we need to come up at the same time, And she's like, he's like, I'll wait then. And then he's like, I'm just gonna wait, guys. And then they're all like, we can't do it separately.
Yeah.
And she's like, fuck it, fine, I'll do it now.
Uh-huh.
Of course, it's a bad idea, but that just shows how they're all not, like, really interested in her or her trauma. They're just like, shrooms time.
Yeah, it's definitely weird. Just like, again, how much they want to use drugs, but like I feel like, again, it could be a way, because it's like digging into, I mean, obviously I have never been on shrooms, let alone any sort of illicit drugs that have made me hallucinate or anything. So I have no idea on how it works, but from what I understand, it just kind of digs into your just kind of psyche.
I think they did a good job of portraying it. Of, you know, she has a thing where she keeps looking at her feet and she sees like the grass growing through it and stuff. And you could tell like Pele and his brother and stuff, they're talking about like this is an experience how they connect with nature, you know what I mean? And that's what a lot of like indigenous people and what mushrooms were originally cultivated for, the magic mushrooms, was because they were like, oh, this is like we go experience God, or, you know, whatever. It's, you know, religious and, or I should say spiritual rather, in nature, and it's, you know, they're like talking, the trees are conscious and they're talking to me. And meanwhile, all the dudes are just like, hey, shrooms, you know what I mean? Woo, drugs. So I don't think they, like, that with that first dose, I don't think they're like, you know, oh, this is cool shaman time. They're like, yeah, we're drinking and we're doing mushrooms.
Yeah.
They're on like college boys trip mode. And meanwhile, Pele and the rest are like, no, this is like spiritual for us. But
yeah, it's definitely interesting to see how that goes down. And I guess really I'm trying to think of anything else, because I know usually chronologically is the best way to tackle this, as you mentioned. I guess we might as well talk about the first instance that they just realized they were in a bad place. And that's with the whole big ceremony where they had the two wonderful elderly people coming out to have a nice dinner, and then they go out to this
to the rock.
to this rocky area where there's like this high rock wall there, and you know something bad's gonna happen, like because it's just like almost bleach white everywhere. And then I knew something bad was going to happen, and you and I both had the same idea whenever you saw that round rock. They're like, yeah, that's going to come into play real quick.
Yeah, it's a real, like, Pride Rock cliff situation, you know, where it juts out, and then at the bottom there's just this, like, nice, flat, spherical, like boulder at the bottom, right, where if one were to, say, jump off, they would land.
Yes.
And I was like, this looks like a suicide ritual if I've ever seen one.
Yeah.
And, yeah, the whole movie up to this point had been, like, kind of unsettling in the sense of like, well, these are weird people doing weird things, but
yeah,
they hadn't really shown anything that was like.
And the only thing they had mentioned was like, oh yeah, you know, we believe that, you know, life has seasons there, like, you know, 1 to 17 is spring because that's whenever you're born. 18 to 36, that's your summer,
right
there, and so that's where you're really thriving and everything. Then like to 37 to like 56, something like that, it's fall, where you're starting to, like, you know, tamper down a little bit, still
it's
settle
like
down.
They say like your working years, it's like the harvest or whatever.
And then it's like the latter years up to 72, that's the winter years, it's where you're considered a teacher and everything.
Mentor, yeah.
And then, you know, Danny's like, what happens after you hit 72? And he's like, that's all it is.
Yeah, and she just laughs because they're like, they're all just normal buddies at this point.
But then leading up to Pride Rock over here.
Yeah, that was one disturbing, and the other disturbing thing that does come into play later is not this group, but the two extra people we mentioned, the two British foreign exchange students, do see this like tapestry that they're like, she's like, what's this? And he's like, oh, a love story, and they show like this, you know, medieval painting ass looking thing of all the steps of a love story, and it just starts getting weird because it shows this woman, and then she like cuts her pubes off and bakes them in a pie with her period blood.
Oh,
and then they fall in love and get pregnant.
Jeez, my stomach can't handle this, Aaron.
I'm just
no.
If the viewers are getting disturbed hearing this, imagine seeing it.
Yes, yeah.
So that comes into play later, unfortunately.
Yes.
But yeah, this main group doesn't know that until they get to Pride Rock, and you get to the real fucked up shit.
Yeah, which where Our Lady takes a very nice swan dive, which I thought like
After slitting her wrists and rubbing them on some runes,
of course, yeah, you got to rub the runes, get the bloody runes down, and then like whenever I've seen scenes of people like leaping to their deaths, usually they'll cut away and everything, and it does, only to cut back showing the body like bouncing back from impact, and you see her face has caved in.
Face just smashes. They show the face get smashed, and it's like, holy fuck.
Yeah, and so then you're like wondering, you're like, okay, they're doing that, why does that guy have a big mallet? Well, you find out soon what the big mallet is.
One guy number 2.
Yes, and whenever he jumps, he misses the platform rock.
Yeah, one job.
And lands on his legs and basically crumples, and he's still alive. And you see how messed up his legs are. That's the thing. They are not afraid to show you how broken their body is. They will zoom in on that to show you how messed up their body is. And as he's like retching in pain, the other people start retching in pain. And that's a common theme you'll see. Anytime one person's in pain, they will channel into that person's pain.
Or any other intense emotion, mind you.
Oh, God, yes. Oh, God, yes. Any emotion they tap into.
And the whole crowd will repeat it. There's usually, like, in all these festivals, there's one or two, like, main people with the spotlight on them, and all the rest of the people will mimic their emotions.
Yeah, it's super messed up. And so then they decide to play whack-a-mole with this guy's head and cave it in. And you see his head just cave in for each whack. And so obviously the 2 students from London, Connie and Simon, are really horrified. Surprisingly, the main group is like, they're disturbed, but they're holding it. The other people are like, no, this is messed up. I'm done. I'm leaving. Goodbye. And so they're just like leaving. And then they're just trying to, it's so bad because they're trying to give the logic, and it's surprisingly, I don't know if I'm just insane or whatever, but I could follow their logic even though it's horribly messed up, where it's like, why would you want a sad, depressing death whenever you can give up your own life and die for a good reason? You know, it's like just part of the religious aspects there. And so even Christian says like, yeah, they probably see nursing homes as messed up where we're from, doing that.
That's the first conversation Christian and Danny have after the witnessing this. Is Danny goes back, and she's of course just like completely shaken and wants to pack and leave, and Christian's like, and she's like, he's like, are you okay? And she's like, yeah, like, are you not okay? Like, I'm not okay. Are you not okay? And he's like, oh, yeah, of course, that was shocking. And he says it just like that. He's like, yeah, that was shocking, but I'm just trying to have an open mind.
Yeah.
They probably see nursing homes the same way. And I was like, oh my God,
this dude kills me. It's brutal, dude. And even you could see at the beginning, because whenever they initially get there before Splat Rock happens, there's like this whole dance that they're doing, and it says like, oh, you could join them if you want to, and it's like, oh no, I'm good. And so then like there's this one girl that we see at the beginning of the film getting ready. You don't know what her purpose is. We're not introduced. This is the first way we've introduced ourselves to her, and she goes and she does like a little playful kick to like Christian, and then she's like looking over, is like, me, and the Christian's like, oh, can I join that?
I guess I should join the dance now.
Yeah, I know. And then Pele's like, yeah, sure, do your America thing, inject yourself into our culture. And so you're wondering like what's going on, and it's so weird whenever it comes to her and how they interject her throughout the story, because she's not like commonly present in your face. So just randomly weave up, be like, hey.
Yeah, she'll be like in the background, and the camera will just focus on her and see her staring at Christian. Christopher,
Christian, I believe. Yes, you're good.
Chris. The rest could be Christian. Yeah,
there we go. Yeah, it's pretty messed up, and this is the part where again, like, it's so hard because I can remember defining moments. I can't say chronologically what happens in what order, because again, it's just huge slews of stuff. So I guess one thing we could talk about is kind of the fact that they do actually kind of dive into how they determine their religious beliefs and runes and everything. Because after that inbreeding comment that he mentions, Josh is talking to one of the elders at like their library. He's like, yeah, this is the runes that we have. It's sort of like language, and the fact that it keeps getting updated, you know, like different runes will mean different things there. And it's like, how do we determine that? And it's like, oh, that guy that's creepily standing at the end of the hallway, he's the one to determine
the
it there.
Oracle. Yeah, and of course he's got a physical deformity, and it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, oh man, is like the main bad guy of this movie going to be a physically deformed man again? like horror movies love doing that. Just be like, disabled people are creepy, remember? But I feel like this one did have some interesting lore behind it, because they were like, oh, he's kind of pressing him on this because he's trying to write his thesis or whatever. And it's just like, he's like, yeah, the Oracle determines, when you say, oh, the physically disabled. So he's like, so what happens after he's gone? You know, like, do you just wait for another baby to be like deformed?
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, no, he was born specifically out of inbreeding.
It's so messed up.
She's like, oh, of course, yeah.
Yeah, this is totally normal.
Right,
this is totally normal. Do you mind if I take pics? Absolutely not. You cannot.
That's funny that it was his very next question. He's like, can I take pictures? He's like, no. No. Oh, God, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and that ends up being a point of contention. And that kind of leads to, like, a lot of decisions the characters make being the stereotypical slasher decisions.
That's
like,
true.
because you have a Mark... randomly pissing on a log in the middle of the field.
Well, okay. We should set this up a little, right?
Yeah.
Because first, after the suicide scene, the two British people both disappear, and there's like mysterious,
my gosh, you're right, that did happen.
Circumstances, like they're both trying to pack and get out of here, and they're like boyfriend girlfriend, and the boyfriend's just like gone, and the girlfriend's in the scene like, where did he go? And she's like, he went to this train station. The truck could only fit two, so he comes back for you. And she's like, he wouldn't just leave me like that. And he's like, well, it was a quick decision. And so it's just like, that's a little sketchy. And then of course she's gone later, and they're like, oh, where did she go? And like, oh, the truck came back and got her, and they went to the train station. They left. Okay. And then you see, the two bodies that had been ritualistically suicided are getting burned on a pyre. They go to sleep. The next morning, they're shoveling their ashes onto this big dead tree that looks like it's been there forever.
Oh, I just missed that part. I saw them carry off the ashes. I didn't realize they put it on the tree there.
Yeah, they dumped it at the base of the tree, and then Mark, at some point, walks. He's like trying to find a place to piss, and walks towards the edge of the woods and pisses on this tree, and you're just like yelling in Sweden. They're like, "You stupid fucking American! What are you doing?"
Yeah. And he's like, "Hey, what do?"
You're pissing on our dead. They're pissing on our ancestors or whatever. And that's where if the suicide thing was enough, you were like, all right, Mark's not going to be here much longer.
Yeah, his days, as if his attitude wasn't enough, this is like sealed a deal on his fate being locked in. And I forgot to mention, we had that wonderful meat pie scene as they're asking where Connie and Simon went there. And then she's like, oh, bro, is that a pube?
Yeah, there's a pube in his meat pie and Christian's meat pie. And the whole time, fucking Redhead McGee's staring right at her.
Yeah, just intently, menacingly.
You're eating my pubes.
God. God, so...
Yeah, and then, yeah. So all of that leads up to, during that dinner where he's eating the pubes, the girl comes up and comes to Mark and is like, "Do you want to come with me?" And he's like, I guess. He's like, "Come with me. Let's go. I want to show you something." And he's like, "Okay, well, I'll be back in a second." And then this is my favorite part, is that all of his friends don't even really wonder where he is. For the rest of the movie.
Yeah, they're just like, he was bound to wander off, because especially whenever it came to planning the trip, is as like, yeah, we're going to party here, right? He's like, no, we're going straight towards this area. But we're passing through there. Why don't we stop by? No, we're not passing through there. Like, he's just, I forgot what what line what did he say, like Swedish meatball brothel or something like that?
Oh yeah, he was talking about stopping in Stockholm before they got there. He's like, oh, we're gonna stop there. Right? He's like, no, that's south. We're not gonna stop there. But he's like, we're hitting up Stockholm on the way, right? Or is there any sort of meatball brothels we need to visit or something?
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's like, God, and unfortunately, well, I say unfortunately.
I just realized as we're talking about this, interesting they mentioned Stockholm Syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of what happens to Florence at the end.
Oh.
Florence Pugh's character, she kind of gets a little lost in the sauce and enjoys the attention of her captors. I wonder if that was intentional.
Yes, yeah, that's actually really funny, because I'm sure there's a lot of the artistic shots that you see a lot, like for instance, like a lot of mirror shots are used where you're looking through the mirror there. So I'm curious as to whether the director had fun with mirrors or is supposed to represent something there.
There's a lot of like symbolism that I feel like they didn't try to hammer too hard. Like the fact that most of the central plot is pretty much Danny and what's his name?
Christian?
No, the Pele.
Yeah.
Pele is trying to comfort her by saying, like, you know, we both have issues with family here. My family died, but the difference is I was embraced, and Christian's not embracing you, but this family can embrace you, is kind of subtly what he's saying. And all of her triggers revolve around family, and then by the end of the movie, she feels embraced by this family.
Yeah, which I feel like is definitely kind of clever there. Like, it makes sense as opposed to just randomly snapping, because this is something she finally has that she wants, is a supportive family there, wants to be loved. And it's just like, it's like that balance between being grounded and not being grounded, because she's being cognitive of like how messed up the situation is. It's like, no, you're not my family, but then also at the same point she's being lured, and
drinking teas with all kinds of mushrooms in them.
Yes, exactly. So they do a good job wavering back and forth there. And going back to bad decisions, how about we talk about Josh deciding he has to go take pictures of this book?
Yeah, I thought he was being smart, because he wore his shoes to bed, and then he kind of sneaks out in the middle of the night. Nighttime's only like 3 hours. I was like, this guy's gonna fucking book it, and I don't blame him, because he knows the number one lesson that any African American knows in horror movies, and that's you just don't trust white people. You gotta get out. At a certain point, you realize I'm the only black person here, and all these guys are fucked up. I gotta get out. But no, he does make a bad decision, and he walks into the little library full of runes or whatever, and decides to start snapping pictures. And that scene is the one that I will say has like typical horror movie elements, where like you can see things that the main character doesn't see, and it's like, well, and there's a big mirror at the back, of course, and I'm like, oh, there's gonna be something in the reflection there.
Yeah, not to mention it's at night.
Yeah, it is at night.
Yeah,
it's the one like nighttime scary scene, and he sneaks in there, and the scariest thing to me was like the elder guy was like asleep in there, and you kind of see him sleeping in a little cot in the corner, but like the character Josh sneaking in does not see him, and it's like, oh fuck, like that guy's gonna like jump scare you. But he starts like rapidly taking pictures of that book, and then the door opens, and you see a figure that looks like Mark, and he's like, Mark, what the fuck are you doing? He's like, we're not supposed to be in here. And he gets closer, and then he gets whacked with the hammer of ritualistic suicide or whatever.
Yeah.
Collapses, and it's not Mark. It's the Oracle, a disfigured guy wearing Mark's face and clothes.
And I don't think he had pants on either, if I remember correctly.
No,
it was like a shadowy dog.
It was hard to tell. I was like, did they? Because first I was like, is that Mark? And they like cut off his dick, and it's like
that's what I thought
pants.
too, man.
But no, I think he was just not wearing pants.
Yeah, you know, it's a free country.
Just hanging dong. Yeah. I will give this movie that there is some nudity in this movie, and I think an appropriate amount of it is dong.
I could have used more dong.
I'm glad because we see a lot of boobies in horror movies. We see a lot of female ass. I'm always an advocate for more male nudity in these films, for some equality, not because I want to see it, but because I want it to be equal. And we saw multiple dicks in this movie.
Yes, true. Yeah.
So good on Midsommar for penis representation.
Normalized dogs.
Free the dick.
Yeah, free the dick.
You heard free the nipple, free the dick. That's an Eric Andre thing. He will just post his penis on Instagram with the hashtag free the dick.
I did not know that.
He does that.
I'm not gonna look that up, but
I don't follow him on, but I've witnessed, or he was on Hot Ones like a long time ago, and so he's been doing this for a while. And they were talking about it back when free the nipple was a thing. He'd be like, "Yeah, free the dick." He'll just post his penis on Instagram.
Oh my god. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, and we'll get to sex talk here in a bit.
There's plenty to talk about.
One thing I do want to mention that I did like is after that happens, they're saying like, "Oh yeah. Did one of your friends steal the book? Because the book's missing, and they are too."
Yeah,
we wouldn't steal the book, and
we
so
don't know anything about that. We're not.
And I love
to
how quick
trap
Christian is to throw his friends underneath the bus.
He even says, he's like, I just want to make it clear that like we don't like associate with Josh, or like we're not friends with him really. And I was like, Jesus, Christian.
Yeah, it's like so much of that, and it's just like, oh my gosh, because not only is he stealing the paper, and again, that was a great thing too, because like Pele, I guess, had heard that. And that's a problem. Pele, he's in cahoots with everybody, so he's an unreliable narrator on what it is, because Pele was talking to Josh, being like, "Hey, great news! Just want to let you know, they've agreed to let you write the report about them here. You just can't mention any names, and got to sign a contract and everything, and you got to make sure it's okay with or no, it was like something with like Christians, like you have to make sure Christian's okay or Josh is okay."
They said you guys it's split between you two. You both have to like work together. You both have to sign the same thing.
And so then like immediately Josh's excitement is like just wiped out, because it's just like gone. And then Christian comes up and Bailey's like, "Good news, you can do the report there. You just gotta talk between Josh." He's like, "Oh yeah, it's fine."
He's like, I told him already that
yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, and they like, never agreed.
Like he was the deciding factor. Like he could ever be offended that Josh would be working on the same project as him because he stole his project.
Yeah. So yeah, Christian's being in a like if it wasn't blatant enough, he was being a big dick. It's just towards the point of like, look, we do not associate him, we're not friends or whatever. I'm like, oh my god, this dude. And it does lead to the moment where one of the, I guess, villagers, commune members, goes up to Danny, says like, "Hey, we want you to join us for like this maypole dancing ceremony." They get to the drink and it's like, "What's this?" And it's like,
special drink to make you dance.
yeah, that's all they tell her, and so then she's like, "Okay."
Yeah, a lot of stuff is sort of glossed over. I think appropriately so, or at least believably so, by just the fact that there's like a language barrier, and so they'll ask questions like, "What the fuck is this?" And they'll just be like, "It's okay," because I don't know a word for it, and they're just like, "Yeah, well, it's got to be fine then,"
Yeah, you wouldn't lie to me.
Yeah.
And so that whole maypole dancing scene, I really liked a ton, because again, like it starts off at first with like Dick Danny being like, "I really don't want to be part of this sort of thing going on," but as the drugs take hold of her and she's just surrounded by the music, the merriment of the other members, she just really starts to get into it and starts going through with the dances, even though she's obviously probably not practiced this dance.
Right.
Going through there, and basically it's revealed that whoever's the last one standing is going to be like the May Queen or May Girl, something like that. Yeah. And lo and behold, it ends up being Danny. And while this competition is even going on, Christian is, you could tell he's like, I don't know, he's in a funk, I guess is the best way, because he's just sitting there not sure what to do. I think it was after he had that talk.
Yeah,
right?
It's because when she gets pulled for the maypole dance thing or whatever, he gets pulled by that elder lady. Was like, "Come to this cabin," and he's like, "Okay," and he thinks he's gonna get grilled about like where Josh is and where the book is, because he's like, "I don't know what it is," and she's like, "How do you feel about whatever the redhead girl's name is?"
Yes,
and he's just like, "What?" And this is like the only time I respected Josh is like, she like asks him that, and he's like, "Feel how?" She's like, she is eligible to mate with you or something.
Yeah.
And the very next scene, just cuts to him leaving the cabin. Like,
yeah,
just like quickly, he's like, I gotta get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, and so he's like in that weird funk, and whenever he's handed a tea, you know, you think he's about to do the smartest thing ever, because he's like, what is this? He's like, oh, it's just some spring water and some nutrients to get you closer to God. Or something like that. And he's like, nah, I don't think I want.
I don't think I want this. She's like, oh, please.
And he's like, okay.
Yeah, yes. It's because he's like, I think he looks like he's trying to get the fuck out of there, but like his girlfriend Danny is like wrapped up in this maypole dance, and he's like waiting, sitting there waiting, and this girl's like, drink this thing, and he's like, fine, whatever.
Yeah, which ends up leading to a lot more messed up stuff, because as soon as she's like deemed queen and everything, and starts going through all these crazy freaking traditions, because it's like, we need you to bless the future harvest and everything, doing all that, he is basically escorted away by the wonderful redhead and others there. But it's funny because this whole thing is just like, if it wasn't blatant enough, by the time I got to this point in the film, my head is just, I feel like I'm in a swirl. I feel like I'm drugged as well going through, and I'm just like, man, I don't even know what to process here right now with everything going on. Because whenever she's taken away to like bless the harvest, he's also taken away for other duties. And I knew what was happening.
Didn't know how it was gonna happen.
Or I didn't know the presentation. And
right.
Good golly gosh, there is a presentation.
Yeah, I should have expected that, given the other kinds of graphic stuff they were willing to show. But
whenever they get him huffed up on smoke as he's also drugged, brings him into this room of the redhead, like on a bed of flowers, surrounded by women of varying ages, completely nude, nothing, just naked as a jaybird, hanging around there doing like their little chants. And he's like wearing this robe, and they immediately like take it off and lock the door, and they're just like, yeah, he knows what to do from here. And even have a shot where like the redhead's legs, is in front of the camera focusing on Christian, and it just spreads out. I'm like, oh my gosh. But that whole scene is probably, I just saw Satan sexually assault a woman in the last film. This is still as disturbing as that. There, because you're not sure if he's into it or if he is into it. There, he's just in a weird state of.
There's definitely some like shades of not consenting to this, but at the same time, he's like, well, I'm here.
Yes! When in Rome, as you said.
God. They, like, literally drugged him up and drug him into this room and are, like, pushing him towards her, but he's just like, okay.
Yeah, it's just so horribly messed up. And so, like, and it is elongated. It's not like a quick, like, oh, yep, this happens, you know what? No, they drag it out. Completely.
There's so many disturbing little details of her. Like, she like reaches up at one point, and like one of the women grabs her hand and gets like real close to his face, and is like holding his hand too, and he's like, "What the fuck are you doing?"
And then she starts like chanting.
She starts like making, as one does during sex, some little moans, but then all the people that are chanting start chanting the moan.
Yeah.
And it's really just uncomfortable.
The part I got really most uncomfortable with, I was already uncomfortable, this just kind of sealed the deal, is whenever the woman goes behind Christian, is grabbing his wonderful beefy hams, and is pushing with each thrust. And I'm just like, I am so disturbed, and I want to get the hell out of here.
He was taking too long for the ritual, I guess, and she starts telling them, like, finish. So he's like,
but they're Swedish.
Yeah.
Hey. God dang it, I had to go for it. And so that's going on, and here's one of the things that I'm just like questioning the decision of the I'm questioning Ari about this, is whenever Danny gets back from like, you know, blessing the harvest, which considered like throwing a chunk of meat, some grains in the ground and doing this like song dance around there. Whenever she gets back, it's just like she hears like the moaning in the background. She's like, what's going on over there? She's like, you don't want to know. It is like,
she's like, that sounds like something I do want to know, actually.
yeah, and so then, like, I guess the people let her go to it. My only guess as to why is so they could just win her over more. Maybe. I don't know.
Also, I feel like they don't... I feel like a lot of people have kind of done things that they're not supposed to do, and like they just kind of tell them they're not supposed to, and then whenever they do it, they get their punishment later, kind of deal.
That's true. And so then, whenever Danny manages to look through the keyhole and see the hubbub that Christian is taking a part of, she is very much, rightfully so, disturbed that, you know, again, because, you know, she's in love with Christian heavily there. Like, pretty much Christian is like the last person that, you know, she's been able to cling on to. She's only had this budding relationship with Pele right before they left for the trip there.
Right.
And so she's like horribly disturbed and everything, and all the women are trying to calm her down and everything there, and then it just starts to devolve into them again sharing the same pain that she has, and they're all just screaming exactly the same way she is. And it's so disturbing. It's just
'cause she's like grieving not only because of her trauma and the trauma of what she just witnessed, but then just all of a sudden this fucked up situation where there's like 10 women around her mimicking her is also freaking her out, and so it just kind of like blends from one thing to the next, where she's like all hyperventilating and screaming because the women are around her doing the same, and that just makes it worse because they're doing the same thing back at her.
Yeah, it's so disturbing, and jeez Louise, yeah. And then it just leads to Christian, where I guess he sobers up a little bit, realizes what he did is really messed up, and so
clarity.
then you're right. Anyways, and so then he starts like running out, and again you see his entire body, by the way. They
still butt ass naked.
Yes, exactly. His dingle hopper is like flopping everywhere there, and it looks beat up.
he's suffered some abuse.
Yeah, for sure. It's been a while since, like, I want to say like the last time we saw this much full frontal nudity was American Werewolf in London.
Yeah, I guess so.
With him running around, but yeah, he starts running, and then he realizes he's making a scene, so he's like trying to halt because he's like, I gotta get out of here, and then he ends up finding where some of the missing people went, like a foot sticking up from the ground, which I believe is I think we confirmed it was Josh there.
It looks like Josh.
Yeah. And then they walk into this one room where it looks like Simon, and this is also just graphically like not even just implication wise or anything, just pure graphicness, showing Simon's body hanging from the ceiling, and you think like, okay, they took his body and they just have flowers growing from his body and everything, right? No, you see like blurry little flesh mounds like moving, and I'm like, don't tell me that's his lungs. And they show you crystal clear that through his bag, where they have his spine also
open his bag,
that he is still alive. He is still alive and breathing, and that's whenever the community knocks out Christian, and then we jump forward to, I guess, the final day of the festival there, where Danny is like covered in a bajillion flowers there, like a flower gown.
Yeah, it's like an entire, it covers her whole face, like only her face is sticking out, and she's in some sort of wheelable chair or something. Yeah,
something like that. And then, like, I guess, like, there's a list of candidates that is up for being part of this ultimate sacrifice,
right? Because it's the 9-day festival or whatever. They have 9 people they're sacrificing, and so many people have already been elected, and there's only one left to decide, because all 4, I guess. Well, how many people?
4,
because it was Josh and Mark,
and then Connie and Simon.
Yeah, Connie, Simon have been selected or whatever. And then the 2 old people that killed themselves in the beginning or whatever. So that's 5. 7. And then there's,
Let's see. I'm trying to... think, because it was like two that went voluntarily. One of them being the brother of Pele.
Those two guys voluntarily. Yeah. And then her job as the flower queen or whatever, the May Queen, is to pick the last one. And they, one of them was Christian. It was one of her choices, who is currently in a vegetable state induced by drugs, I guess. They warned him. They were like, you can't move or talk, okay?
Yeah. It's so disturbing just how friendly they were about the whole situation. And then you just see the process.
Yeah. And they have a big bingo ball thing.
Oh, yeah. They used the bingo ball to determine
the other person that she could choose. Yeah.
Yeah. God dang. Yeah.
And it was Torbjorn.
Yeah, and so that's the interesting thing about this film, because it gives hints as to where the film is going, because it showed the love story about the period hair pie going on there.
And then that happens.
And then you see, again, just the fact that there's random imagery, like a burning bear. You're like, how's that going to come into play? And even at the beginning of the film, it's like, what's that bear for? And it's like, you know, doing that. And then turns out the bear is being hollowed out for the one selective member, aka Christian, to be stuffed into. And then all of the bodies are dragged out to this yellow house, which has been the centerpiece of this entire community. And they're like, yeah, you don't go in there.
Yeah, you can't go there. And they only say it like once, so it's not even like super creepy, like, I gotta go in that barn. It's just like, it's way in the back, and they're like, what's in there? And they're like, it's a special spiritual place. We're not allowed in. And it's like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
But yeah. It was, in retrospect, a very suspiciously new building.
Yes. Yeah, very, very brightly colored. Looked completely fresh and new. Wonder why. And so whenever they do finally bring out all the bodies, it's at this point like really bad, because like if it wasn't clear enough, Pele is rewarded for bringing outsiders in, because obviously they can't have these rituals without having outsiders. They even talk about whenever it comes to like having kids, they're like, we usually have to have outsiders, you know, stop in, and so that way they help populate the community.
With not incest babies.
Yes, with not incest babies.
The incest babies are only the oracles.
Yes, that's exactly it. And so they're dragging all these bodies out, and a lot of the bodies, no, they're not just dragging corpses. They're like stuffed scarecrows.
Yeah, some of them are just like their faces stretched over scarecrows, and they have like branches coming out of their mouth, or like flowers up their titties or whatever.
Yeah, it's horribly disturbing there, and it's so bad because, you know, you're going through this process, and you know, they're setting it down in appropriate area where it's like all geometrically pleasing there. And then with the two people that voluntarily went, which again, you alluded to the fact that you think Pele's parents died in a fire, specifically a sacrificial fire.
Like two people that are still alive in there besides Christian, who's like drugged to be alive but can't move.
Yes.
And they volunteer to sit in the fucking place or whatever.
And they're given like, you know, sap from the yew tree or whatever that will help, you know, not feel pain whenever they move on. And the bad thing is too, and I feel like it's actually done pretty effectively, the fact that Christian can't scream or do anything. All he can do is just look around and see what it is, but he's in such like a stupor that he's not even like, you know, trying to scream help and nobody can scream. He's just like looking around and is just trying to take it all in. And then whenever they do decide to light it up on the building, and you see Danny kind of go through, and you know that she's basically kind of mentally broken in whenever she, especially after seeing Christian have sex with another woman, she's like, oh yeah, you're dead. And it's so disturbing too, because like the head leaders, whenever they do light it up, he's like, you will be suffering forever in hell, basically.
Yeah, they like put all the sins on him as a bear or whatever. He's like the evil spirit holder that they then burn alive.
Yes, and so whenever they burn...
It's funny, his name's Christian. He's fulfilling the role of Christ.
Ironic, isn't it? Oh my gosh, Ari, you're a clever
guy.
Yes. And so then it's like, you know, it's focusing on like the people screaming because they're mimicking the same pain that the others are feeling inside. Because it's bad too, because like, you know, it's given the sap tree, the tree sap or whatever, and as soon as he catches on fire, he starts screaming in pain. And so Pele's brother's looking over, he's like, oh, this is going to hurt there. And so that's deeply disturbing. But as they're doing that, you see Danny again go from grief to happiness slowly in the usual A24 horror style way, you know, similar to lots of films we've seen prior. And it cuts to black, which, in all honesty, I was worried the film was going to cut to black whenever it says, who do you choose? And then we're supposed to make interpretations on who she's supposed to choose.
I kind of had the same thought too. I was like, man, are they just going to end it here? So it's like, oh, did she kill her boyfriend or not?
Yes, exactly. And I think that would have made me a little more aggravated because, again, whenever it comes to ambiguous endings, there's very select few that work as opposed to ones that don't work. So, and not to mention this film, again, I can understand. Rosemary's Baby definitely felt long. This felt, I mean, obviously longer in every sense of the word. Like, it just, you feel like, again, I think it's like 2 hours, 38 minutes, I want to say, something like that.
Watching fucking Lord of the Rings or some shit.
2 hours, 28 minutes. Shit. So, yeah, 2.5 hours there. And so, yeah, you feel it. And, you know, by the point that you get to the end, I was just like, okay, yeah, it kind of ended the way I thought it would there. It's believable that she would succumb towards the community there because, again, she's like, I have family again.
Right, and they did all kinds of things to elevate her, and they literally followed her command as she's the May Queen or whatever. She felt some sense of power and control over her life, but more importantly, like she belonged, and she had a family to be held.
Yes, that's exactly it. Oh, man. Woo! Yeah, that's Midsommar. Any other points we want to tackle with this film or anything like that?
No, I'm exhausted after that.
Yeah, dude, me
Film
too.
and analysis.
Yeah, jeez. I mean, I feel like whenever it comes to getting, what is it? Whenever it comes to getting the overall feel of it in comparison to slow burn films, it's not one of my favorites, but I did enjoy watching it. It was nice to watch once, especially for the whole catch of like, oh, it's a horror film that mostly takes place during the day. You know, I liked it. How soon I'm going to be returning back to it? Definitely, probably not soon. I think I'm more likely to watch Rosemary's Baby than this one again. And not to say anything bad, because obviously there's some good cinematography. I did like its use of color, especially because of their location. It's just, I don't know. Not a film that, because even my wife, whenever I was getting ready to record, she was like, oh, how was it? And I was like, oh yeah, it's pretty good. She's like, do you think I'd like it? And I'm like, no, probably not. Probably not. So that's going to seal it for this Midsommar chapter here. And this time we are definitely going to be heading in the opposite direction of the general vibe films we have been watching. Yes. Need a breather.
I need a palate cleanser after those two.
Yeah. Well, I hope this is definitely going to be a palate cleanser because this film is a little under an hour shorter than this one.
Wow, okay. Nice,
so
nice.
You're going to do that. It's a sequel.
Okay.
So it's definitely it's different familiar territory there. And it does have to deal with, surprisingly, how you said, like, oh, how they make the deformed person the killer. Has to deal with that. So can you think of any films, not to mention, this is the first film in the franchise to go to the third dimension.
Third dimension. Is it Freddy Krueger 3D?
I'm sorry.
Nightmare on Elm Street 3D? He's a deformed guy.
You're on the right number, wrong franchise. There. And it has to
Friday the 3D 13th?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we are good. That is the correct direction. Yeah, I knew you would immediately make the right correction there. So
those were the two I was thinking.
Yes, no, very, very good guesses overall. I figured we needed to head back to Camp Crystal, like, just really take a, summer vacation break going over there.
That'll be
so
perfect. I'm about to go camping, so we'll just slot this right in.
Yes, this is wow. Holy hell! I didn't even know about this, so it's like even more appropriate. So definitely thank you all so much for listening to this episode, and be sure to stay tuned for next time because we'll be popping the scary with Friday the 13th Part 3.
Woo! 3 dimensions. Can't believe they invented a third dimension.
I know, like they did for Bloody Valentine.
My crazy.
Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube, Castbox, or iTunes platforms to stay up to date when new episodes drop. To see what Aaron and I are up to, check out our respective Twitter accounts. For me, it is @CoalkirkVA, and for Aaron, it is @AnimalGameDev. Thank you all so much for listening to our podcast. We'll speak to you all again next time when we're popping the scary.